Coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, not all the news is good.
Unfortunately, we had a negative outcome from a large global phase 2 study that we recently completed in pulmonary sarcoidosis.
Pharma company Kinevant tested a new potential drug called Namilumab to see if it could be a way to beat sarcoidosis. But the clinical trial showed it didn't work. And yet, the process still teaches us something about sarcoidosis, so the next researcher might have a clearer picture of where to look.
I think that's fair. I think that the people will change how they view this disease based on these results, and their models will strengthen. It might mean that some drugs that are being considered for this disease get deprioritized, and it means that other drugs that maybe people were wondering about might get prioritized based on the kind of outcome of the study. And
it's all coming up on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
This is the Sarc Fighter Podcast, living with sarcoidosis and other rare diseases. Here's your host, John Carlin.
Hello and welcome. This is episode 131 of the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. I'm your host, John Carlin. The date of this recording, January 24th, 2025. I want to start out by saying that in the last episode, I told you about this new streaming show on Netflix. It's called No Good Deed. And in the show, one of the characters believes he has cardiac sarcoidosis and is going to die. Now, I'm not going to give you any spoilers. Don't worry. But I binged the whole show, and it's very good and worth watching. Now, there are some big stars in this show. Lisa Kudrow from Friends, Luke Wilson, Ray Romano, all star in this. And the plot unwinds as people with, let's just say, all sorts of unusual backgrounds try to buy a prized piece of property, which, as it turns out, has its own sordid history. Now, that's all I want to say about the show, all right? But it's a win for sarcoidosis. There's an adage that says all publicity is good publicity, and even though the show is not actually about sarcoidosis, the fact that they needed a character to be stricken with a rare disease and that they chose sarcoidosis from potentially hundreds of options, right, that might be out there that potentially could have worked, they chose sarcoidosis, which means more people are thinking about sarc. Maybe they're Googling it. Maybe they just said it out loud or they heard it. So they kind of know what it is. It's one of those words that's out there in our vernacular in the background. It's like, oh, sarcoidosis, I heard of that. That guy had that on the show, right? So this is a win for our community. It makes us a little more relatable. It's a little bit more familiar. It's just a crack in the type of publicity we would want so that everybody would want to come rushing for a cure, and fundraising would be easy, and you wouldn't have to tell the story over and over and describe what you have for this funny word that nobody can say and nobody understands. That would be the goal, right? That would certainly be the goal, short of a cure. But this is the beginning of that. That's why I say, it's just a crack, but it's something. And maybe some water will get in that crack and freeze, and the ice will make the crack a little bit bigger, and it'll just keep growing and growing until all this information about sarcoidosis comes pouring out. But anyway, I'm thinking about that in too much for sure. But this is a good win for us. So I just wanted to say that I watched the show. It's a good show. You should watch it. It's got some real star power, and just stay with it as this plot starts to sort of unwind and you realize that there's a lot more going on in this story than you thought at first. Okay? So check it out. I think you'll like it. All right. Today I have a really special podcast for you. Now, this is, as I said at the top, it's not the best news. Namilumab did not work the way initial studies indicated it might. But the folks at Kinevant wanted to come back on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast, the voice of sarcoidosis, to talk about it, to discuss what didn't work in their study, right down to the molecular level, where it was hoped that this drug would be an inhibitor to a key protein and that might curtail the effects of sarcoidosis. And they went through the clinical trials and they studied it in patients. And at the end of the day, the patients who received the drug just didn't get any better. They didn't get any worse, but they didn't get any better. So the CEO of Kinevant, Bill Gerhardt, along with Randy Rogers, the Senior Director of Patient Advocacy, joined me, and they reached out to us. They reached out to FSR to walk us through the process of what we learned, and they tell us why these results are actually known as the second best outcome in biotech. And also Mary McGowan, who's the CEO of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research, will also be with me to put all of this in perspective for the sarcoidosis community. And you're also going to hear a lot about why this type of research doesn't happen without an organization like FSR. So I think there's some really, really good context here, and I really think that you're going to find some meaningful and interesting discussion. And it's all coming up next here on the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
Hi, I hope you're enjoying the Sarc Fighter Podcast. You may be wondering, what can I do to help? How can I be a part of the sarcoidosis solution? It's simple. Make a donation to KISS, Kick In to Stop Sarcoidosis. 100% of the money goes to the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. Look for a link in the show notes of the Sarc Fighter Podcast. Welcome back to the FSR Sarc Fighter Podcast. We have a very special episode today. Joining me today are from Kinevant Sciences, Bill Gerhardt, the CEO, and Randy Rogers, who has been here many, many times. And also joining me is Mary McGowan, the CEO of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And unfortunately, Bill, we have some news that we didn't hope that we would have to report out today, but things have not gone as we had hoped with your candidate Namilumab as a drug that might be something that could treat sarcoidosis. Can you tell us what happened?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, John, and happy to share the results of the study and talk a bit about what we learned and what the maybe future hope can be for this disease and for patients that are suffering from this disease. But unfortunately, we had a negative outcome from a large global phase 2 study that we recently completed in pulmonary sarcoidosis. As those of you who have been listening to these podcasts in the past, or maybe otherwise have heard through communications from FSR, we designed and executed a large global phase 2 study to test a new drug called Namilumab in pulmonary sarcoidosis patients. And we worked really hard to make sure that we designed and executed the right study. And we had very compelling animal data and other data to support the potential for this drug to work. And yet, despite all of that rationale and all of that hard work by a whole lot of people, we were unable to demonstrate that the drug had a treatment benefit for these patients, which is very, very disappointing for us, and I know for the community. But in clinical research, it's inherent that there's a risk of these studies not working, because in the beginning, particularly in the first study that we did with this drug in these patients, a lot was unknown, and yet despite those risks, we nevertheless had to try, knowing that even in this worst case outcome, it would still significantly benefit our understanding of the disease and how it works and who these patients are that are suffering from this, that ultimately this will help other people in the future. So there's a saying in our industry that success stands on the shoulder of failure, and I hate to be the shoulders of failure here, but we wanted to be very proactive in communicating out to the community not just the results of the study, but the learnings from the study, and this doing this wrap up podcast, if you will, around how things turned out is an important part of that mission. So thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, I like that quote. I'm sorry we have to use it today, but success stands on the shoulders of failure. Kind of, you gotta, no is an answer, right? No leads you to the next thing, right? And so I guess that's one way of looking at it. Randy, we have talked about this on the podcast at least 2 other times, and there was a lot of promise going in. Can you sort of fill in some of that backstory for us?
Yeah, absolutely, John. Thanks again for having us. And I won't go into all of it. I'll reference the appropriate historical episodes where I can, and that way if folks do want to go back for the full story, they can. But Resolve Lung was a phase 2 study evaluating Namilumab in chronic active pulmonary sarcoidosis. These are people that have very active, very symptomatic disease, not well controlled by standard of care, and our inclusion criteria definitely reflected that type of patient. It was a once monthly injection, so patients either received Namilumab or placebo for the first 6 months, and all participants who completed that initial treatment period could have the option to receive Namilumab in a 6-month open label extension. So we were really committed to listening to the patients and hearing what was important to them, which is access to that new medicine. And so all patients, regardless of Namilumab or placebo, were able to, if they wanted to, access the medication. We felt very strongly about that. Namilumab, we believed, could treat the underlying cause of sarcoidosis by inhibiting a key protein. That detail is in episode 69, more about the rationale of why we chose to study Namilumab for sarcoidosis. And we also released a second episode with you, John, thank you again, in episode 113, which really covered our ability to successfully complete the enrollment of this study. So we enrolled 107 participants across 40 sites in 7 countries. Again, those patients with active symptomatic disease. So get into the gratitude, but I will just kick off a huge statement of appreciation for the partnership from the sarcoidosis community, FSR, and other global advocacy groups. We could not have reached this milestone without involvement and partnership from sarcoidosis patients. So huge note of gratitude there.
Great. Thank you, Rainey. I appreciate it. And I have appreciated all along the fact that you guys were willing to come on and share your efforts with the sarcoidosis community here on the podcast. Bill, if you could, I want to get a little bit more granular, if we can keep it still in layman's terms. But so this was supposed to be a protein inhibitor. What was it that we hoped Namilumab would do inside the body that it appears it didn't do?
Yeah, sure. Great question, John. And the mechanism by which a drug works is what we mean when we describe our mechanistic hypothesis. In other words, why will a drug work to treat this disease based on how it works at the molecular level? And in this case, we were targeting a key cytokine, which is a protein that immune cells release that can create an inflammatory response. And we believe that by inhibiting that protein, that signaling protein, that we could significantly reduce the inflammatory response in sarcoidosis, that we could reduce the granuloma formation and persistence and reduce the inflammation that results from those granulomas being in the lungs and in other tissues. So our mechanistic hypothesis was based on a couple of observations, one of which is that in patients with sarcoidosis, their GM-CSF levels are elevated. GM-CSF is the cytokine that we targeted. It's an acronym for a very long word, granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor, but it's basically a signaling protein. And we noticed that in sarcoidosis patients, they were elevated levels and that they correlated with disease severity. So that doesn't necessarily mean causation, but it is at least a starting point. And based on that, a lot of animal work was done, animal studies were done that demonstrated that if you inhibited GM-CSF in those animal models, you could significantly reduce a form of granuloma from forming. And when you added GM-CSF back in, those granulomas could then reoccur. So that data, plus a lot of other lab results and animal results, gave us the confidence to initiate a study. I say confidence with a caveat, and that is in sarcoidosis, we really don't understand what causes the disease, even at the molecular level. So we're making these educated guesses based on indirect evidence or connecting the dots. And that was certainly the case here. And you don't have a predictive animal model. In other words, if your drug works in the animal model, it's highly likely to work in the disease, and it significantly increases the risk of doing the clinical trial in patients. But in many cases, that's the best evidence that you're ever going to have. So when we talk about drug development and clinical trials being risky, particularly for diseases like sarcoidosis, that's what we mean by that.
Got it. So it didn't work the way that we had hoped, and yet this can benefit other researchers by you sharing your data, correct?
100%. So we will publish the results and present the results of this study so that others can learn from it. At a high level, what folks will see once we publish the data is that there was really no evidence of the drug providing a treatment benefit for patients in this study. It was relatively safe and well tolerated, had a consistent safety profile to previous studies that had been done with this drug and other diseases. As a reminder, it's a once monthly injection, subcutaneous injection that was relatively well tolerated, and it's also a very potent inhibitor of this protein. So if this protein was involved in the disease pathology for sarcoidosis, it would have had a significant benefit. And we had a number of assessments in this clinical trial. We measured the time and the percentage of patients who worsened during the study. We measured changes in pulmonary function and changes in how they were feeling as measured by a patient-reported questionnaire. And we measured the percentage of patients who were able to successfully taper down to the target dose of steroids, 5 milligrams a day. And then we also measured the percentage of patients who actually got down to 0 milligrams of steroid. And we really did not see any benefit, unfortunately, of Namilumab versus placebo across any of those assessments. And we also looked at subgroups of patient populations, for example, those that were on high doses of steroid or on methotrexate or not, versus or those patients who had a lot of inflammation in their lung or not. And we didn't really see any differences in those patients as well, too. So we know that we successfully executed the study at a really high level. We, enrolled enough patients in the study to draw strong conclusions about the potential of the drug. We enrolled, as Rainey mentioned, the patients we hoped to enroll, those patients who had active disease despite the availability of existing medicines, patients who would normally be a candidate for a biologic, something that has to be injected. And we know that baseline values of the patients were well balanced between placebo and the active drug. So and then we quality controlled the data at the very end. So we got really, high confidence that the study was well executed. And there's really nothing that we could have done differently from a study design standpoint that would have changed this outcome that we're convinced of. It's just simply that our mechanistic assumption was wrong. And as you mentioned, we learned a lot during this study, and so we are motivated to incorporate those own learnings into our own practice going forward, as well as to share and communicate those learnings out to, the community.
So the next company comes along with a candidate, at least they know not to go after that particular protein, or they know they need to go after it differently.
Correct, and it will change people's understanding for what's happening mechanistically at the biology level. People's assumptions about what is important, what makes a difference, et cetera, will change. Their model will change as a result of clinical data. And you can do research in animals for decades and still not really understand what's going on in humans until you do these clinical trials and you publish the results, and then people incorporate that new information into their models, which helps lead to a mechanistic hypothesis that actually is true, is actually correct, it actually reflects what's happening in patients.
Yeah, Rainey, this trial was huge, and putting on a clinical trial is no easy undertaking, is it?
No, we kind of joke about if it was easy, those of us that work in biotech and pharmaceutical research, we wouldn't necessarily like it. That we do strive to go after those things that are really novel, really challenging, from study design to mechanism to the type of patient community that we're here to try to serve. It's really, really very, very hard, very, very exciting, very interesting, even with a negative study outcome.
So how big a lift was this for you, and I understand your approach was a little bit different to this clinical trial than some others?
Absolutely. There's this wave of activity around the concept of patient-focused drug development. And when we say things like patient first or patient-centered or patient-focused, what does that mean? Really, it's having that true partnership within the patient community that you are designing, trying to research and design a new therapy for, building a foundation of trust, particularly in the sarcoidosis community, was just top priority for us. It was something that it started actually even well before I came into Kinevant with FSR and with patient focus groups, and really trying to understand the wants, the needs, the capabilities of patients that are interested in research, people living with sarcoidosis, not just people living with inflammatory or autoimmune diseases. It was very, very specific, and there was a lot of learning for us to do in talking with patients about what was important to them. So from working alongside patients from the very beginning, ensuring that the study was designed with patients in mind, things like open label extension, ensuring access to study drug. There was a lot of hesitancy, a lot of, well, I've never considered a clinical trial before, and what's the difference in a research study as compared to an off-label therapy? What are the benefits and risks? So we really tried very hard to ensure clear, informative, globally specific messaging around the study rationale, and just being very clear about the benefit and risk, our potential benefit and risk or anticipated benefit and risk, and always being very transparent about what to expect. We never assumed people would say yes to participating. We wanted to provide enough information for people, for the sarcoid community, to make informed decisions that were right for them on a personal level. So I do think that at Kinevant, our team's commitment to that, to really having that patient-focused approach. And I will also add, none of that would have been possible without the support of advocates, folks like Mary at FSR and her team. For us to build trust, we have to provide information through channels and mechanisms that are trusted. We cannot just, put information out into the universe and hope that patients find it. We really wanted to be proactive about how the study was communicated and where the sites were and what to, all those things, what to expect. So ultimately, I think our ability to be patient-focused was only to the extent that the sarcoidosis community was receptive and interested in partnering with us. And they were. The patients were here with us every step of the way, helping us execute on this program, and it would not have happened without them. So I think from all of us at Kinevant, I'll just say it wasn't just FSR, it wasn't just the people that participated in the study, it really was the community as a whole, clinicians, researchers, advocacy groups, people that even just considered participating that maybe weren't quite the right candidate. It truly takes a village. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah. Well, Mary, I want to bring you in here. Mary McGowan, the CEO of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research. And Mary, so the pharmaceutical company, in this case, Kinevant, comes knocking on the door and says, hey, we want to do a clinical trial. How does the foundation jump in, vet that opportunity, and then assist in finding patients? Because it's hard to find people to participate in these things.
Thank you, John, for that question. All I can say is we welcome it with open arms and jump with excitement because, as you know, it's challenging, as we've talked about, for clinical trials to run in the rare disease space. First of all, it's just been an honor, Bill and Rainey, for our team to be working with you. We are so very grateful to you and Kinevant for being just so committed to this and for all of your time and the resources and the strategy, long hours, and Rainey and Bill, to your point, the patient focus centeredness of this trial were just out in front throughout the entire process. And on behalf of the entire sarcoidosis community, we are so very thankful and grateful to you all for taking this risk and for working so hard on trying to get better therapies for sarcoidosis patients. Also, we want to thank our community, our patients. We had over 235 who completed the pre-screening. Obviously, a big commitment from the patient and the caregiver community who were so just excited again to be part of this research, to be part of the trial, understanding the importance of this and the risk of this as well. And we are so grateful because, of course, without the patients, we can't do the research that's necessary for sarcoidosis and other diseases. So we are so very grateful to them. But Kinevant, it was just an honor to be working with them. We learned a lot. And again, the commitment from you all to step up and do town halls with FSR and the community so that sarcoidosis patients could ask questions and learn. To be part of the educational summit with over 400 patients from around the globe, and to present and to make yourselves accessible through an exhibit booth where you can communicate with patients about the importance of this trial. And all of the work, the podcasts, again, not just leading up to the trial, but here you are again, your leadership in sharing the results and delivering a tough message. And I love that, Bill, about the quote of success stands on shoulders of failure. Let me just say your shoulders are very high. Very, very high for others to be standing on to get to success. And this is a huge step in getting to that success. So again, our great thanks and gratitude to you all, and again, our community for stepping up and really making a commitment, all working together. Rainey, as you said, it really takes everybody, clinicians, researchers, our hospital alliance partners, your team, the researchers, all working together collectively to come up with moving the needle forward on this. So our deepest gratitude.
Yeah, Mary,
Yeah.
thank you so much for being there and for keeping FSR strong and robust and vital. And Bill or Rainey, I'm not sure who would want to answer this, but without an umbrella type organization that sort of represents the disease, you wouldn't have any place to go. I mean, it would be so time consuming to go to every single little medical center and say, do you have anybody? Do you have anybody? You know, because it's not just one criteria. It's not like anybody who has pulmonary sarcoidosis. It has to be somebody who's there, but who hasn't had X amount of some other therapy or lives close enough to the medical center. I mean, there's so many things that have to line up before you can even enroll a patient. So what would you do without an organization like FSR?
We wouldn't even try.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, it's just like, it's so ridiculously hard, even when everything is lined up, and even when you have a FSR, patient advocacy group who is doing everything that they can to facilitate clinical research and to educate patient community around the benefits and the need to participate in clinical research. Without that lift, without that effort, then it would be impossible to conduct clinical research in sarcoidosis and deliver ultimately, a new therapy for patients that are going to help them and help them live with their disease and to hopefully cure their disease at some point. There have been a number of clinical trials prior to ours that were terminated early just because of feasibility. They couldn't find patients, or patients were too hesitant to participate, didn't want to take any risk or incur any inconvenience. And as a result, there are no new therapies today. And so it's important for all patients to understand the benefit and the importance of participating in clinical research, as well as the availability of clinical trials to them, and as Rainey said, incorporating their perspective into clinical trial design so that it makes it as easy as possible for them to participate in clinical research as well too.
Yeah. So am I right in saying this is the largest interventional clinical trial in the last 10 years?
Yeah, no, 100%. So we wanted to enroll and we wanted to design and execute a study that was going to conclusively not just answer the question as to whether or not the drug works, but also to identify what the most optimal design would be in a phase 3 study. And since there's so little information here in sarcoidosis, we designed an assessment-rich study, a lot of assessments in this study. And we had to have enough patients in order just to make statistical conclusions about whether or not the drug worked and in what ways did it work. We learned a lot in this study for sure. But one of the things that we, still a big question is like, what's the most sensitive assessment of treatment benefit? What's the most appropriate measurement of a treatment benefit in a pulmonary sarcoidosis patients, which, after all, is the snowflake disease. Everybody's got sort of different things going on. So that creates a challenge for like how you get the drug approved and on market. Pulmonary function, how the patients are feeling, changes in imaging of their lungs on a CT scan, differences in steroid use. This is still unknown, and not even the FDA knows what the most sensitive assessment of treatment benefit is. So they basically say, show us the results and then we'll let you know. And that's why we incorporated so many assessments in our study design. And it was burdensome for sites and even for patients to do all these measurements, but it was just really important for us to, we had one shot to get that information. It was really important for us to do that. Hopefully aTyr study will read out positive later this year and they'll get their drug approved based on how they design it. But until then, this is, still a big question for the field. And, sarcoidosis patients are the ones that we should try as an industry to try to most help. The patients who don't have any good therapies and have really sort of crummy treatment options where they're trying to titrate between the side effects of the drugs and the symptoms of the disease on almost, a weekly or monthly basis. But the risks are high in conducting clinical research in diseases like this, how to design and execute. It's very difficult to open sites, very difficult to enroll. The regulatory pathways are uncertain. But these are the types of studies that pharmaceutical companies should do. And if successful, the rewards were high for patients and for those companies. And so I appreciate Mary's comments earlier, but Rainey and I represent, a large number of people on the Kinevant team who, have been working really hard for a long time. And then more importantly, I'm grateful to Roivant for the support and the patience and the desire and the intent to run a big enough study that would really sort of give us a conclusive, result. And even though these results were, negative, we sort of dark humor in our industry referred to this as the second best outcome in biotech. The first, obviously, being positive results and enabling companies to move forward and get that drug developed in our market. Maybe the third, outcome, the worst outcome would be if there was unclear signals and it wasn't sure exactly if the drug, and you didn't run the right trial and you didn't get the right assessment, or the quality control wasn't there, or patients didn't show up for their assessments, or, et cetera, et cetera. So we didn't have any of that. And so everybody, around our company and our community views this as being a successfully conducted study that gave us a very clear answer that's going to,
you have a definite no here. There's no blurriness, no cloudiness, no gray area. It's a no, and that helps.
Yes, that's a good way to summarize it.
Yeah. So, but is there? So, again, and I'm the lay person here, because this didn't work. Is there a whole line of thinking that can now be eliminated that we don't have to research any further? Is that a good way to generalize it?
I think that's fair. I think that the people will change how they view this disease based on these results, and their models will strengthen. It might mean that some drugs that are being considered for this disease get deprioritized, and it means that other drugs that maybe people were wondering about might get prioritized based on the kind of outcome of the study. And it's really kind of a sort of part of a broader question, which is, what's the opportunity in this negative event? And if we don't take full advantage of what we have done, then that's the only way we lose here. So how do we view this as a win for patients? And look, we're really, really disappointed that we won't be able to continue developing this drug. This became more than just a business opportunity for us. We became very closely aligned with the very important mission to understand this disease and to help these patients. It became personal for us, like it is for you. But clearly, our understanding of the role that GM-CSF plays in this disease was wrong. And we're convinced that no other study design would have changed the outcome. And we're, really proud of our clinicians and our clinical operations team and our collaborators like FSR for, executing the study at a really high level, very high quality. We can trust the data. And there is a temptation to call this a failure, a failed trial, right? Patients lost a lot of wasted time and effort and money. But the only way we lose is if we don't capture all those lessons learned. To just see the results and publish them would be a wasted opportunity. So how can this be viewed as a success? How can this be viewed as a win for the disease and ultimately for patients? Well, for certain, for sponsors, like you were just asking, pharmaceutical sponsors, we're going to learn how to better design and execute clinical research in this disease. And we're going to make it as easy as possible to participate. That's another like key learning that came out of this that we're going to push out. It's like there were things that we would do differently in terms of the design to make it easier for patients to participate. Clinical trial staff, like the doctors and the study coordinators, are going to learn how to better conduct clinical research in sarcoidosis. Many of them conducted this, sarcoidosis clinical trial for the first time ever. And they were overly optimistic and had the wrong assumptions about what it would take. And so they are maybe half the sites in our study were the first time that they'd ever did a clinical research in sarcoidosis. So they're experienced now, and they're going to be better partners for the next sponsor. Even FSR learn how to better support clinical research and how to better support sponsors conducting clinical research. And we pioneered a lot of things with Mary and her team together, some of which worked, some of which didn't work, and so they'll be better enabled to help support clinical research. And patients hopefully will have less hesitancy and increase their participation. Without patients, we can't do this work. And less than 5% of patients participate in clinical research in sarcoidosis, but probably less than 1%. So just changing it by 1 or 2% doubles the number of patients that are willing to participate in clinical trials. And so we, hope that our, results will help. Like, for example, one of the lessons that's going to come out of this is that a lot of patients who had active symptoms, who were on doses of medication, when those medications were stopped and tapered, nothing happened. Like, they did not get worse during that 6-month period of time. So knowing that, and knowing that maybe if I stop taking the medicine and take the risk of being on a placebo, I might learn something that I wouldn't otherwise learn, and I might not have to put up with these side effects that I'm incurring because I'm not really getting a benefit from the drug that I'm on. So, and then finally, we hope that all of the data coming out of this study will help us collectively better understand the disease and your patients who suffer from this disease. To your point, John, it's one of the largest data sets that has ever been produced. And we're going to make it as easy as possible for researchers to access it. We're going to publish it. We're going to make it available, and it'll strengthen people's scientific, hypotheses about what's going on here. And so these are just some of the ways, some of the lessons, learned can be applied to better understand this disease, how to more optimally conduct clinical research in this disease, increasing the probabilities that effective medicines, reach patients, and that more sponsors, will conduct clinical research in this space. And I think that's how we can collectively view this study as a success. That's how we collectively win.
Yeah.
That's how patients can eventually win.
Mary, do you share Bill's optimism going forward?
I do, absolutely. And again, a lot of lessons learned, even on FSR side, as Bill indicated, ways to recruit better, ways to make this patient-centered. And as you know, FSR is doing a lot of work in this area, just generally about trials and breaking down barriers. So I hope the community recently saw our FMLA win, making sure that, workers who want to take time off to enroll in clinical trials like this trial, right, that their job is protected, that they are not at risk of losing their job. Doing the patient-focused drug development session with the FDA just a couple of months ago, providing FDA an opportunity to learn really the lived experience of sarcoidosis and the challenges of research and the challenges for patients is really critically important. I think the other learning too is just the importance of the patient registry that we have, that we can turn to that. And these are committed individuals who have signed up, that they're very interested in research, so that when a partner like Kinevant comes along, right, We have close to 7,000 patients there that we know are committed to actively seeking out opportunities for research. And how do we continue to build those patient registries? So again, all of this is just building success. It might not be immediate success, but they are the steps towards a very successful future. And that's really what we need to keep our eye on the ball as we're moving this forward. It's all of these learnings, all of these strengths, all of these contributions from the community, from the industry partners, from the researchers, patients, care partners collectively that is in no doubt going to lead to much better therapies in the future and a much better understanding of sarcoidosis as we all work together on that journey.
And Mary,
100%.
what would you want to say to the patients who said yes to this trial and the physicians who agreed to work on it? What would you say to them?
I want to say thank you so much for your commitment to this. Because you're not just doing it for yourselves, you're doing it for future generations. You're doing it for everybody at large. And in that process, you are willing to give of yourself, your time, your body, your everything in order to your commitment with your families, everything to build on this success and be part of that journey, a very important part of that journey, because as we said before, without the patients, we cannot move this needle forward. We have to have patients who are willing to give of themselves and to understand the real significant contributions that they are making. And for the patients to understand, again, even though they were part of this trial and the trial it has stopped and is not moving forward, just to really reflect on these learnings, on this success as being part of the process, and their willingness to continue to enter into other futures in the future, knowing more now than what we knew before, thanks to them, and not giving up and continuing on that journey collectively with the community. And again, no doubt we are going to get better therapies, which we need for sarcoidosis.
Yeah, it's well said, Mary. The reason that there are not, one of the reasons why there are not better therapies available to patients today is partly because previous generations of patients were unwilling to participate in clinical research. So beyond those altruistic reasons that you just gave, I will just say there's also personal benefit for patients to participate in clinical trial because they get a very high level of clinical care. Every little thing that's going on with them is being measured, regularly during the study. They learn something about their disease that they didn't know. They learn something about the medicines that they're on as to whether or not they were really providing a benefit. And so they, in addition to those altruistic reasons to benefit patients today and tomorrow, there are those personal benefits that they get from participating in a clinical trial like this as well, too.
So important, Bill. Thank you for highlighting that. Absolutely. And we hear that from patients. And it's really important that patients do understand that, because sometimes I think there's some fear associated with that, right? Like if they're not going to be continuing on the medication that they were on, or that if they go off of a medication that they were on, what might happen. There is some fear around that. And what we hear is that they are really closely monitored, learn a lot about their disease. And anyway, thank you for highlighting that, because it's important information as part of this process.
If I could just add back to the patient focus piece of this, I really want to make sure that this is communicated very clearly, and that the benefit of, for example, designing a study where you ask people to come off of background therapy. So this was a novel study design to stop IST, immunosuppressive therapies, methotrexate and the like, and also to taper off of steroids. Tapering off of steroids, I think, is the easier piece of this. I know that that's not real popular with the sarcoidosis community, but there is fear, there's hesitancy, there's this risk of, some patients call it flare or worsening of symptoms if you stop a medication or you change your therapy and try something new. Maybe it'll be worse. I mean, I think there's a lot of unknown and uncertainty. There's also, the elephant in the room, I guess, with the pharmaceutical industry, is that there is this historical black eye around companies not listening to patients. And what I will say is the ability for companies today in 2025 to really have their ear to the ground on what's important to patients. We know that patients don't want to come off background therapy, and we know that that was a big challenge for this study. And ultimately, the reason that we did that was to ensure we had the cleanest, clearest answer to our question. And by doing so, we have a very clean, very clear answer to our question. And so just to come back and say, we work with patients, and we also just need to communicate why we make the decisions that we make to build trust, to go back to that, this is the rationale behind why we asked you to stop taking that medication. And the silver lining that Bill mentioned, that the patients in this study came off of those therapies and did not experience worsening. Every single data point around quality of life, every single time a participant plugged in their answers of how they were feeling and what that experience was for them of being on this study, all of that data is just so incredibly rich in our understanding. So it does get into the details a bit, but I think the details are really important to just help explain why the studies are complicated and why they exclude the vast majority of patients. But ultimately, it's to be able to provide these insights back and to benefit the future of research. So,
all right, guys, listen. As a sarcoidosis patient, just let me say thank you to all of you for doing what you do, for having done what you did. We've got to just keep plugging and find therapies that work, and with the idea of finding a cure at some point down the road. And all of this is so important. And without everybody in this discussion right now, those types of, we're never going to get there. So thank you. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to join me here on the podcast today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Bill, Rainey.
I feel like a zombie, just feeding and stumbling.
My takeaway from that conversation is that success stands on the shoulders of failure, right? It makes sense. You keep trying, you learn a little bit each time. Each time something doesn't work, you refine your efforts and you go back and you try it again. Maybe just a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, a different protein, different way to inhibit a protein, whatever it is, right? That people much smarter than me understand and do. And this might seem like a strange analogy, but I remember listening to a podcast with Sir James Dyson. Is that name familiar? He invented the Dyson vacuum cleaner. And the idea was that whirling air, like a tornado, inside your vacuum cleaner would create enough suction to gather the dirt from your floors and your carpet. And he talked about the hundreds and hundreds of designs that he did and the tests that failed. And he's very funny. He's got he's from Great Britain. He's got the British accent, and he would talk about how he would go into his lab and he would work on whatever whirling motion of air that he thought he could create, and it wouldn't work. And he'd go home and he'd have lunch, he'd have a cup of tea, whatever it was he was doing, and then he'd go back to the lab and he'd try it again. And I remember this. It's been a couple of years since I heard the podcast, but I believe it took him several years and hundreds of tries before he got it right. And now today we have this new type of bagless vacuum that, instead of using the old-fashioned electric pump that pulled air through the way vacuums did for decades, he created this tornado inside the machine that would suck the dirt up, and we have this new type of bagless vacuum, and I'm sure that he's made $1 gazillion from it. But the point is that Sir James Dyson didn't quit, and he kept learning, and this was a perfect example, right, of how success stood on the shoulders of failure. All right. So let's hope maybe that the next time an idea shows promise in fighting sarcoidosis, the team can look at what Kinevant tried with Namilumab, and they can learn from that data and try a slightly different path, hopefully with more success. All right. Remember, none of this happens without you, without FSR, without the patient database, and all the different ways that FSR is essentially tending to the needs of the sarcoidosis community with support groups, with research, with funding, and constant dialogue with all the players, with government agencies such as the FDA and all the teaching hospitals and the medical centers, and talking directly to us, the patients. So I just want to thank the folks from Kinevant, Bill and Rainey and Mary from FSR, all for joining me and wanting to spell this all out for us here on the podcast. Now, this is a good time to contact me if you'd like to share your story on the podcast. I'm now lining up all of my guests for 2025, so please contact me at carlinagency@gmail.com. Remember, the official Sarc Fighter song is called Zombie by fellow Sarc Fighter Mark Steyer and his band, the White Hot Lizards. Mark's story, the story behind the lyrics, is in episode 12. This podcast comes out every other Monday. As I'm speaking today, my trusty boxer Dougal is not curled up on the chair in my office because, yes, Mary is home and he's following her around the house. The backstory to the founding of the Foundation for Sarcoidosis Research is episode 11 with Andrea and Redding Wilson. Please follow Sarc Fighter on Facebook, Instagram. I'm even on Peloton as Sarc Fighter, and I have a blog about bicycling, Carlin the Cyclist, and there's a section there called Cycling with Sarcoidosis, because it can be hard to do something like riding a bike a great distance when everything in your body isn't working right. I talk about that a fair bit. Sometimes I just talk about my adventures, but sometimes it's about sarcoidosis. Also, if you're new here and you're just trying to figure out what sarcoidosis is, listen to episode 2 with Dr. Simon Hart. That's your Sarcoidosis 101 chapter. And if you want to hear more about me, my story is episode 1. Once again, send me an email. It's in the show notes, carlinagency@gmail.com. And until next time, keep fighting.
Learn to suffer, you feel pain someday. Learn endurance, your strength will fade away. Dead man walking, trying to keep up the pace.